Managing Those Pennies, brought to you with the good wishes of Republic Bank. We're the one for you.
And it's 19 after 6. My time to say good morning to Crystal Howell. She is a chartered professional accountant and certified internal auditor. Happy Monday. Loving your colors.
Thank you.
Well, today we want to continue and kind of finish off looking at risk assessment in business.
Yes.
So we're starting today with reputational risk.
So that'll be the last slide in the series, if it can be pulled up. And we're going to take a look at how this particular risk, because as I would have mentioned before, there are a lot of different risks that businesses need to take into consideration. So if you are looking to get into being a business person, these are some of the things you can think about. And these are just some of the risks. Not all, there are a lot of different things to think about, but these are the main ones that persons usually have to take into consideration. So one of them would be reputational risk, and that looks at a lot of the non-financial ways in which you would have to make sure that your business is not impacted. So a very, very recent example would be with all the power outages that we've been having, what kind of impact is that having on the business model? And the fortunate thing for Light and Power is that there's not a lot of alternatives that people can go to. However, if your business had to run into any kind of issues like this, how would you be able to manage it to make sure that your reputation isn't damaged, that persons aren't running to the competition? How do you compensate people for it so that they don't feel as though they've been disadvantaged? What is your plan for when things happen? Because this business, things happen. You can't expect that everything will be smooth sailing. But if you don't have a plan for how you're going to address the media, address the public, work out compensation for when things go wrong, then it falls to chance, and chances are your reputation may take a hit and you may not be able to recover as quickly as someone else who has made sure that this is the way we operate when certain things go wrong.
Well, that calls for getting ahead of any situation.
Yes.
So can we delve into exactly what would need to be done in an instance where, well, for argument's sake, using what happened over the last few weeks as an example, where you can get ahead of that in terms of communication and all of the other areas that you need to really cover?
Well, communication is key, and we have seen that that has been happening. Persons feel a lot more comfortable when they have a feeling for what is going to be going on, what's happening. You can't always give exact details. For instance, you might not know how long we may be out of power. But if we have an idea that this is what has gone wrong, these are the steps that we're taking to fix it. If people feel as though they're getting some kind of honest feedback, they're a lot more sympathetic, as opposed to if you're kept in the dark and you're treated as though you're not a part of the package in terms of finding out what is going on, where the information is coming from. And it also helps if persons feel as though they don't have to do all the work to be compensated as well. So for example, you know, there have been things circulating on the media and the social media about having to file a letter to be able to apply for compensation. However, given that this is a known issue and that all of your customers are impacted, it would be more helpful if you would say, you know that you've been disadvantaged, we're going to apply the compensation to your next bill.
Everybody, and keep it
And
simple.
just, instead of having a whole slew, like the entire island has been affected, so having everybody having to come in, fill this paperwork, it's extenuating circumstances. It's not a one-off situation where only a few persons have been affected, and you use that medium to be able to identify who has been. We are aware that it's the entire island. So to facilitate that may help persons to feel a little less upset that they've been disadvantaged and they have to go out of their way to be compensated after they've been damaged.
Okay. Now, looking at, can we start to look at financial risk now?
Yes. So financial risk, this is related to any extra costs that you may have to incur if you lose a major client. So many persons, their clientele may be based or centered around many clients, but one in particular might be the major focus. So a lot of persons may tend to say they shift all of their resources and attention to this particular client without taking consideration that you may still be supported by all of the other smaller clients. So you have to make sure you manage your finances properly so that you can, yes, cater to this particular client, because if you lose that, that's a significant loss of income. But you have to make sure your other customers do not feel as though that they're second class to anyone else. Because if you lose that, and it ties back into your reputation as well. If people or customers get the impression that you only pay attention if they're a big fish, they may decide that they're not going to do business with you anymore. And that has a real financial impact. So the other part of financial risk is to deal with the actual financing. So you have different sources where you would get your income coming in. So you are earning from your sales and everything else, but you may also have had funds that you brought in personally. And then another form will be if you have to get a loan, which is the route that most persons will go down, because most small businesses may not have the ability to issue shares or any other of the more financially savvy options. But a loan is something that most persons would seek to get into.
To be able to raise financing. And in thinking about that in a holistic type of way, we often talk about small and medium-sized enterprises being able to move to the next level.
Yes.
What advice would you give to them in terms of kind of, you know, being able to shore up their finances and move to the next level, maybe get more clients involved, expand the services they offer without breaking the bank?
Right. So the reason they left the financial part to last is because most people do it the other way around. They run and they get the loan, and then they don't think about all of these things that we've been talking about.
Affect their reputation and business.
And then they run out of money, and they still have to pay the bank the funds that they would have borrowed. On top of that, they have interest as well to take into consideration. So this is why it's so important to make sure that before you get that money, you have these plans in place. You know how you're going to spend it. You know what you're going to spend it on. You know how you're going to manage these things so that, for instance, if something like this had to affect your business where the electricity has gone out, how many businesses had a generator to make sure that they could still continue operations, that they can still work? How many had a water tank? These things cost money. You don't just say, you know, let me just go and pick this up and go and buy. It's a significant cost for some small businesses to say that they're going to set up a water tank or get a generator so that if there's a power outage, their business can continue. But then when you think about the possible loss in terms of, especially if you have a food business or anything like that, which is dependent on electricity, what is the loss in terms of your stock, in terms of having to probably still pay wages because persons are still there, they're still going to expect to be paid. There are a whole lot of things you need to take into consideration, which is why you have to make sure you have a plan and you try to take as many of these things into consideration, because everything has a cost associated to it.
Right.
So if you're going to budget for a generator, do you know how much it costs? Do you know how much the labor is to install it? With a water tank, it's not just buying the water tank. Do you know how much it's going to cost to install it, the labor, and everything else that comes along with that?
Yeah. And you mentioned knowing how much or how many services you will need to provide, how much product you'll need to make that money back and all that.
Exactly.
All those things we covered.
It's a lot to take into consideration before you get to the point where you're borrowing the money and then you run out before you've even accomplished the main goal that you borrowed the money for.
So to tie it all up, in terms of reputational risk and a bit of the financial risk that we looked at this morning, I think the social media that you mentioned really has changed the face of reputational risk as well, because it takes the power out of the hands of those people who thought before that they could really shape everything that their clients or people in the community thought about their businesses. So thank you so much for coming in. As usual, always sharing some interesting things that we can not only apply to business, but that we can apply to our everyday lives as well.
Yeah, and we're going to continue that next week where we delve into loans, because it's Christmas season. We know you want to get those loans. Crystal will deal with that next week. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Crystal Howell is a chartered professional accountant and certified internal auditor.
Managing Those Pennies, brought to you with the good wishes of Republic Bank. We're the one for you.